So what we want to talk about today is the Islamic movement and the evolutionary process that it has been going through. So we want to talk about decline, analysis, rebirth, revival, and revolution. Whatever process, whatever country that has been involved in this Islamic movement, they have been through their own process. I have some pictures here of some books called Issues of Islamic Movement. This is from 82 to 83. They have on this picture Imam Khomeini, Hassan al-Banna, Maulana Maududi. These people played, in fact, these would be considered the pillars of Islamic movement of the last century, right? The first two, Imam Hassan al-Banna started Ikhwan al-Muslimin in Egypt in 1928, would be considered the father of modern Islamic movements. He would be considered the father of modern Islamic movements. So if you go to Jordan and you find Ikhwan there, they derive from Ikhwan al-Muslimin in Egypt in 1928. If you go to Egypt itself, you will have the same group. I don't care whether you're here, if you go over to Dar al-Hijra in Mass and Ikhwanis are sitting over there, they all derive from Imam Hassan al-Banna, who was martyred in 1949. The great work of Ikhwan al-Muslimin was the epitome of starting at the bottom and saying we're going to give it a try, right? Because they come in at the end of the colonial period when Islam was at its lowest. Now you have to remember, Islam, out of its 1400 years of existence, have ruled for 1200 of those years. Then we suffered colonialism. That means if you look at Africa and Asia, the whole world was colonized. The whole world of color was colonized by Europeans. I don't care whether you're talking about the Dutch in Indonesia or the British in Malaya, Singapore, Hong Kong, and all that. It don't make no. Everybody, China, the whole world, Africa, every drop of Africa was colonized except one or two little places, one little corner. The rest of Africa was all colonized by Europeans. Muslims joined in the fight against colonialism. Some of the greatest fighters in history fought directly against colonialism. Sudan didn't just give up the ghost, right, and submit to Western colonialism, right? The person called the Mahdi, Muhammad Ahmad of Sudan, fought against what they called Chinese Gordon Pasha, and whooped they behind in Khartoum in 1884-85. Defeated the British Army, right? But they finally lost and succumbed to British colonialism, right? So wherever you go in the world, the Muslims, people of color, fought against colonialism. But it was a period in our history when it seemed like that the qadr of Allah was going against us, and no matter how hard we fought, no matter what we did, the colonialists generally won and they dominated us. Then in 1928, it wasn't the first period of revival, but the first concrete revivalist period of the last century came to change the thinking of the Muslim from the time of Jamaluddin Afghani, right? And in fact, I might have his picture here. Jamaluddin Afghani. The Iranians call him Jamaluddin As-Sabiqun. He was a person that thought that what we have to do is kind of catch up with the West. So in the late 1880s, he went around to all the Muslim leaders who were stooges by then of the West and tried to get them to incorporate some of Western thinking into Islam, and he and others like Rashid Reza, they did what they could in this Islamic revival, but Islam was finished. I mean, for that period, dominated. Then came people like Imam Hassan al-Banna. Later on, other people from Pakistan, Maulana Maududi and others. Maulana Maududi, he started like 1941 Jamaat Islami. Jamaat Islami, very similar to Ikhwan al-Muslimin. These movements were to try to bring Islam to the forefront. When Pakistan separated from India in 1947, they went from India. Right now, Maulana Maududi's group, they're mostly muhajirs inside of Pakistan. They moved from India to what was part of India, the northern part called Pakistan. But they didn't establish the Islamic State. Pakistan was the only country in modern times formed specifically for Muslims, but it did not become an Islamic government. Very strange phenomenon. Egypt, during the late 40s, if Hassan al-Banna, and we don't say if because the hadith say you don't know what you're talking about, really. So it could have been possible with the strength of Ikhwan al-Muslimin for them to force the issue under King Farouk of an Islamic government. But they didn't do it. Why? Because the time was not right for that to do it. We have people in our history. We have Booker T. Washington and all these guys. We got the talented 10th type, Du Bois. You know, we have a lot of people in our history. We have great personalities. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and we wonder why didn't they reach the final goal? They didn't reach the final goal because at that time the world was not ready for Islam. They said, why would Malcolm be martyred right at the peak of his career? Because the world was living through its own historical process. It was right in the middle of decolonization, right? That was fighting all over the world at that time. And all in the news, you heard about Dien Bien Phu, and you heard about Saigon, right? Phnom Penh, all of those names, Algeria. All of these places was fighting for their liberation against colonialism, right? You heard about the Congo, Katanga province. That's all you heard in those days because that was what was happening at that time. The world Allah had not allowed the world to come to the point to where it's ready. The whole universal, the whole international process is ready to move wholeheartedly toward Islam. Although Muslims all over the world, in Indonesia and everywhere else, are fighting for independence. The Muslims were part of every independent struggle in Algeria and everywhere else. But they didn't grab power. Why didn't the Muslims grab power in those days? Because they themselves had kind of lost confidence in the process of Islamization themselves. And they was fighting under the code, the guidelines of tribalism, nationalism, or what have you. They wanted to develop a nation state of their own to break away from colonialism. So we still had Mozambique going on. We still had Rhodesia going on, right? We still had the whole colonial process going on, right? Now you think about it. All of those people, those names that you heard then, right? You may have heard about Chairman Mao and all of these people in China. You got to remember now, all of those people, they were going through their national struggle. They broke the chains of colonialism, domination, and they come on up. All of Asia is on the way up, isn't that right? Think about it. China is the third most powerful, maybe the second most powerful country in the world. But at that time, it had just won a nationalist revolution, right?